The Bravest Girl in the World, Monday on CNN.
I'm Paula Hancock in Seoul, and this is CNN. It's day 9 of the U.S. government shutdown, and it's 9 a.m. in New York, which means U.S. markets open in 30 minutes' time. I'm Maggie Lake in New York, Nina Santos is in London, and Pauline Chu is in Hong Kong. Welcome to World Business Today. Who will blink first in the political game of chicken on Capitol Hill? As the U.S. gets closer to hitting its debt limit, some in Congress say breaking through the debt ceiling may be the best choice for the nation.
We'll get the president of the World Bank's views on this ongoing crisis. He's going to be speaking to CNN's Richard Quest.
It could be an historic day for the U.S. Federal Reserve. Janet Yellen is the president's pick to chair the central bank. She would be the first woman in 100 years to get the job. Some say it is long overdue. First, the crisis in Washington drags on. Financial markets are hoping to see some signs of progress in the fight to end the political stalemate. President Barack Obama said Tuesday that he'll speak to the Republicans about anything, but that would only happen if they vote first to end the shutdown and raise the debt ceiling. That didn't go down well with top Republicans. House Speaker John Boehner said the president is calling for, quote, the unconditional surrender of the Republicans. That said, some in Washington believe that the president's offer may have propped the door open just a little bit towards some sort of short-term compromise. On Wall Street, investors are becoming increasingly nervous about the debt ceiling deadlock, but with less than a half hour to go before the opening bell, stock futures are actually pointing to a higher open for U.S. stocks. News that President Obama will nominate Janet Yellen today for Fed chairman is helping sentiment. Investors believe Yellen will pursue market-friendly policies. She still needs to be confirmed by the Senate, but this nomination does seem to remove at least one bit of uncertainty for the markets. Stocks may begin the session in positive territory, but the major Wall Street averages begin Wednesday's session at one-month lows. For a closer look at the action ahead of the bell, let's go straight to Allison Kosek. She's standing by on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. And Allison, we seem like we're going to see some buying at the open. Does there seem to be much conviction behind it?
That is really the good question. You know, the Yellen nomination could give that conviction that you're talking about. This is after we've seen the Dow close lower in 11 of the past 14 sessions. You know, I talked with one trader about this nomination, and he said at this point, the way Wall Street sees it, there is kind of relief that there's going to be some certainty as to who's going to head the Fed, possibly because there is still a nomination process. Also, the fact that the nominee is not some unknown just being thrown in. Also, there's a good bet that she will continue quantitative easing. As far as the trade has been lately, you know, we've seen a lot of thumb twiddling, a lot of investors just sitting on the sidelines waiting for Washington to come to some sort of solution about the shutdown, about the debt ceiling issue as well. That lower volume has turned into the volatility that we've seen with most investors choosing to sell. It's 8 days away. I'm talking about the debt ceiling deadline. The expectation, though, here is that a deal will get done, but you can never be too sure, and that's why the debt ceiling debate has really overshadowed third quarter earnings season, which kicked off last night with Alcoa topping estimates showing strength in a unit that sells auto and plane parts that offset lower metal prices. Alcoa shares are set to rise 2.5% today. Different story for Yum Brands, which also reported. Yum Brands, the parent company of KFC and Taco Bell. Yum Brands missing third quarter expectations because of weakness in China. The problem there is that Yum gets half of its revenue from China, and that's why you may see the stock dip at the open. Maggie?
Yeah, that went from being such a strength for them to being really their Achilles heel right now, but they remain committed to that. Interesting. Allison, we're not seeing much reaction in stocks. It is worth pointing out to our viewers, though, we are starting to see some strains in the very short-term part of the Treasury market. Not long-term yields, but the very short-term yields have spiked up. I know stock investors have to watch all of that. This may be driving them to the sideline. You said a very important thing about volatility. Can you just circle back and explain, when there are not a lot of people trading, it can create outsized moves in the market, can it? It's hard to use the overall Dow reading as a gauge right now.
Exactly. I mean, so you're seeing these big moves like a triple-digit drop yesterday and then the day before yesterday as well. And you're seeing that because there are few players in the game right now. Once again, because, you know, everybody's kind of waiting to make a move, waiting on Washington, waiting for that headline to come out of Washington that a deal has been done. And yes, when there are fewer trades, it exaggerates the moves in the market. So what some may see as a big push to sell maybe really isn't, because one trader telling me yesterday the smart investor is actually buying into this dip. Maggie?
All right, excellent insight there, Allison Cossack. Thank you so much. And Nina, it is going to be important to watch bonds as well as stocks when we head into this. And I will also say that a Washington watcher yesterday, they are growing increasingly nervous, giving 50% chance that they might go over the debt ceiling now. So that not sitting well with investors.
Yes, certainly not, especially considering as that debt ceiling raises the prospect of the United States perhaps missing some of its payments on those bonds, and that's the reason why those spreads are widening. While markets are coming under increasing pressure from the partial government shutdown, the ripple effects are widening as well. As Brianna Keeler reports now, more ordinary Americans are feeling the pain themselves.
Day 9, the government shutdown is getting real. For families of troops killed in combat, they will not get automatic death benefits during the shutdown. $100,000 to help cover funeral costs and travel to Dover Air Force Base to witness the dignified transfer of their loved ones' remains. In North Carolina, food assistance for poor women and children cut off. And 27,000 furloughed government workers have signed up for unemployment as they go without pay. Just 8 days until the United States could default, President Obama phoned House Speaker John Boehner, both sides indicating the divide is as deep as ever.
We got to stop repeating this pattern.
But later, President Obama appeared in the White House briefing room, opening the door to negotiations if Republicans agree to a short-term solution to reopen the government and increase the debt ceiling.
If there's a way to solve this, it has to include reopening the government and saying America's not going to default, it's going to pay our bills.
How long might a short-term measure last? 4 to 6 weeks, one GOP source tells CNN. Republicans may agree if the president promises to negotiate, but it's far from a breakthrough. Without some sort of concession, like a cut in spending, a stopgap measure may not clear the House.
The long and short of it is there's going to be a negotiation here. We can't raise the debt ceiling without doing something about what's driving us to borrow more money and to live beyond our means.
The House voted Tuesday to create a congressional committee on government spending and the debt limit, as well as pay federal employees currently working without pay. But the Obama administration threatened vetoes. A stalemate still, and the clock is ticking louder and louder.
It certainly is. We can hear it all the way up here. Let's get the latest from Washington. Brianna Keeler joins us from the White House. And Brianna, it strikes me as we're watching this, if this were a business deal that hit this kind of roadblock, a week would be a long time. The two CEOs at any point could just get together in a room and do the deal. It's not the case here, is it? You're dealing with, or you tell me, is it? We're dealing with parties that have disagreement within their own ranks. Where does that leave us if we only have a week, especially when we're talking about the Republicans?
That's exactly right. And especially when you're talking about the Republicans, there are these big disagreements within their ranks. You talk to CEOs and they say they are not envious of President Obama because he doesn't get to run the country, obviously, the way they get to run corporations. So here's the issue. And yes, a week is not a lot of time, Maggie. But what you now have, and perhaps things are still in a stalemate, but we're sort of doing a temperature check right now to see if there's a thaw. The White House is open now to this idea of a short-term measure to avoid a default. Short-term is better than a default, I'm told the president thinks, and obviously that is very true. And this is something that Republicans are seizing on. So the idea now is that perhaps there would be a week, maybe enough time, certainly not to work out some kind of deal that would be palatable to both sides, but to work out this stopgap measure. 4 to 6 weeks, one Republican source told CNN. There's still issues in this, though, because House Republicans, even for a stopgap measure, Maggie, they're going to want some sort of concession. And the White House is insistent that it has to be a clean, short-term measure for the debt ceiling and for government funding. Now, it does seem that perhaps there may be some semantic wiggle room in there, but at this point, we don't know exactly what that sweet spot would be, that the White House would be able to say, hey, this is a clean short-term extension, and the House Republicans would be able to feel that they were able to get something. So there's still a lot of details certainly to be worked out, and there isn't even any real framework at this point. It's just maybe sort of, I think, a feeling of maybe a thought. It's like a feeling. It's not even anything really substantive.
I love the way you explain that, Brianna. A feeling of something that might happen that maybe it's a hope we're grabbing onto is what it is. You know, I've noticed, and we're going to talk about this with Christine Romans a little bit later, this worrying trend that we're starting to hear rhetoric coming out, especially from Republicans, that, oh, this debt ceiling thing, it's a lot of fear-mongering, you know, default. We're not going to default. We can't default. That must be incredibly frustrating for the White House, who is trying to make the case that we need to have action.
It's frustrating for the White House, and I'll tell you, it's also frustrating for Republican leaders who do believe that the effects of a default are very real. And economists believe they are, Maggie. Just an example, I mean, you heard some of those examples, the kind of outrageous ones, the death benefits for families of those killed in combat. Well, check this out. If there is a default, that's the shutdown. But if there is a default, millions and millions of Americans will feel it. There are tens of billions of dollars in payments set to go out November 1st. That includes Social Security recipients, so older Americans, Medicare recipients, disability, folks on disability, and active military. They are supposed to be paid November 1st. If there's a default, those payments very much in jeopardy. And that is the kind of pressure that so many politicians are feeling. And that's why you certainly have them going up against some folks who are questioning, yeah, does a default really mean something so terrible?
Oh, I feared we'd get ourselves into this situation. Not a good sign. Brianna down there translating the insanity for us. Thank you very much, Brianna Killer. Great to see you. And Nina, I can tell you, everyone in the business community is just shaking their heads at this dialogue. We just can't believe we find ourselves here again.
They are, yeah. There's a lot of consternation where I am about watching the world's richest country, Maggie, having to deal with these issues, as Brianna was just telling us before. Whether to decide to pay Social Security checks for older people, to pay Medicare, or to please the markets and pay bond investors on their interest payments. Because if they don't do that, well, these kind of markets will tank. As you can see in today's session, it's a question of 2 up, 2 down at the moment. A lot of this also has to do with news that Janet Yellen is probably going to be nominated to chair the Fed going forward. That is viewed as positive by the markets because she's seen as being very much pro-stimulus, so likely to keep the cheap money flowing, at least for the time being. We've also had some downbeat data on this market, the UK market, as you can see there, the FTSE 100 not managing to push above the flat line for the moment. Industrial production for the month of August for the UK unexpectedly falling 1.1% from the month of July. Just to crunch the numbers for you, that's actually the biggest fall in nearly a year. And part of this drop was down to manufacturing output, which also fell, that one coming down around about 1.2%. It was a different picture over in Germany, though. This is the Eurozone's biggest economy. Industrial production there rising a better than expected 1.4%. And in light of that, that's what I wanted to show you. As you can see, when we had that figure coming out, the Etc. DAX did manage to make it up above the flat line, and it is now gaining, albeit an anemic 1/10 of 1%, Pauline.
At least going in the right direction, Nina. And the markets here in the Asia-Pacific region were also pointing in the positive direction, at least for the most part. They seem to shrug off concerns about the U.S. stalemate on Capitol Hill. And the Yellen news did add a dose of direction for the markets here. The Nikkei ended up more than 1% as the U.S. dollar strengthened against the yen. We did follow Panasonic shares, and they rose after the Nikkei Daily said the company would stop making plasma TV screens by early 2014. That's in order to stem some of the losses there at Panasonic. Shanghai closed higher as well, up 0.6% on speculation that Tianjin, a port city in northeastern China, would be the next city to get approval for a free trade zone. And you might remember that just over a week ago, Shanghai officially launched its free trade zone. And this is all part of China's economic reforms to try to liberalize the financial sector. Nina.
Well, it's one of the biggest jobs in the world of finance. In a moment's time, we'll tell you who the US president trusts to replace Ben Bernanke as Federal Reserve Chief. Well, we've already given you a pretty big hint throughout the course of the last 14 minutes.
كنت لا أكتسب الأموال الكافية لأن نصف الأسماك كانت تتعفن قبل أن تصل إلى السوق، لكن الآن عضوها في مخازن التبريد.
बिना रुकावट दे क्वालिटी पावर चिंता दी कोई गल नहीं
dependable and continuous backup power anytime. Who else? Kirloskar da.
बढ़िया है जी किर्लोस्कर
شكرا للشركة كيرلوسكا.
I'm a Gulf citizen.
I am a Gulf citizen.
Golf Citizen is an online golf booking platform that lets you book in real time with no extra fees. With instant confirmation, you spend less time planning and more time playing.
I'm a Golf citizen. Are you?
GolfCitizen.com. Search, book, play.
Thinking of banking in Africa? Think Zenith. Zenith Bank PLC is one of the biggest banks in Africa, with about 1 million shareholders and over 300 business offices in Nigeria and subsidiaries in other African countries and the United Kingdom. Committed to the best possible customer experience. Zenith Bank, in your best interest.
Welcome back to World Business Today. A White House official says President Barack Obama plans to nominate Janet Yellen to be chairman of the Federal Reserve. Yellen is currently the #2 at the U.S. Central Bank. If she's approved by the U.S. Senate, she will be the first woman to lead the Fed in its 100-year history. Her views on economic stimulus measures are seen to be very similar to her boss, Ben Bernanke. President Obama is expected to make the announcement later on today in about 6 hours from now, Maggie.
Because of the crisis in Washington, many believe the Fed will hold off on cutting stimulus this year. This could mean it could be Janet Yellen, not Ben Bernanke, who actually pulls the trigger and begins to taper. There's no doubt she'll face massive challenges if she gets the job. The host of CNN's Your Money, Christine Romans, joins us now. Yellen went from the runner-up, the maybe, to the looks like the pick for the job. Christine, this is a big move, isn't it?
It is a big move, and she was the runner-up, but the runner-up with hundreds of economists really rooting for her, saying she was the right woman for the job, the right person for the job. And for the markets, it takes an unknown out of the equation, Maggie. Dr. Yellen is seen as continuing Bernanke's low interest rate policies and his stimulus. She is well-versed in Fed politics and procedures. She's been second in command at the Fed since 2010. This is probably the most important job in the world right now, right? Because she will have to figure out how to pull back on that economic stimulus that has been so important for the American economy and for the world economy, that $85 billion a month in bond buying. We're going to get some hints about Bernanke's thinking about that, in particular the taper later today when the Fed releases its minutes from the September policy meeting. Investors are going to be interested to see just how close the vote not to taper was, what that could mean for Fed policy over the next few months. But in the meantime, so markets have had a pretty good year and a good response to this news from the president that he's going to actually be picking her. For the year, the Dow is up 13%, the Nasdaq is up 22%, the S&P 500 up 16%. But look, we've got this ominous sign for the markets, right? This spike in the yield of the 1-month Treasury bill. That's something everybody was talking about there. I mean, you've got Yellen and her appointment by the president, now awaiting Senate confirmation, of course. That's something that is dominating Wall Street today. But the debt ceiling is not far from anybody's mind. And this chart from yesterday is certainly something everyone's talking about this morning, Maggie.
And like her predecessor, if she gets it, her hands are going to be tied to a certain extent as to what she can do on monetary policy while Congress continues to dawdle with the fiscal policy. Christine, something we've talked about a lot is this worry, this conversation surrounding the debt ceiling. Is it real? Can it move? Is it going to be as catastrophic as some people say? We just talked to Brianna a little bit earlier. Listen to something that was just a Republican senator on our air on CNN just a short time ago. Listen to what he had to say about it.
The problem is we continue to kick it down the road, and pretty soon everything's going to continue as it is till it doesn't. And when it doesn't, that's when the catastrophe comes. So I'd rather have a managed catastrophe now, which I don't think will be there. Here's the thing that all the media does, that say is default equals not raising the debt ceiling. That's not true. That is not true. Those are two different and distinct things.
I have no words, Christine. First of all, the media is communicating, meaning us, exactly what all the leading CEOs and business leaders and economists around the world tell us will happen to the debt ceiling. A managed catastrophe? What is that?
A managed catastrophe. Okay, so let me. There's a lot to unpack here with Senator Coburn's comment. So let's start with this idea that all of us in the media are saying there will be a default come October 17th if the debt ceiling is not raised. You and I have said many, many times, I expect this government is going to pay every penny of its interest on every one of its outstanding obligations for lenders. There's no question about that. And then there is this huge raft of other bills that come due. The difference between what we bring in and what we put out every year in the American government, every month rather, is financing. It's financed like a business. It's financed like most businesses are financed. What's happening here now is we've gone from talking about Obamacare and how Republicans despise Obamacare, and that's why they've shut down the government, and that's why they're not going to raise the debt ceiling, to now they want to balance the budget by not raising the debt ceiling. And somehow, if you don't default on your bonds, it's okay to default on other bills. That's something the Treasury Department says just isn't possible, and sends a terrible signal about how the way America does business to the rest of the world with unpredictable consequences. I mean, Maggie, what is your thought, I guess, on the fact that if you don't raise the debt ceiling, there's this group of debt ceiling deniers who say you won't default? Of course we're going to pay our interest, but what about all the other bills?
Yeah, it's all defaults are not equal. And my issue, and this is completely nonpartisan, my issue is managed catastrophe is what we thought could happen if you let Lehman fail. And we saw how well that worked out for everybody. These are very complicated, intertwined markets. You can't bomb one thing and then think there's going to be no fallout someplace else, and somehow you can manage it. Very, very scary rhetoric, very irresponsible. And that is what we are hearing from economists. And Christine, hopefully we're able to sort of have some breakthrough. We don't continue to have to hear this, but we got to call it like it is when we hear that stuff coming out. Christy Romans, thank you so much for joining us. This is a scary turn things have taken. But again, we should remind everybody, Nina, this is rhetoric. This is not policy right now. This is theater and politics. It's rhetoric. Let's hope it doesn't become policy. We have a week to go. And poor Janet Yellen, back to the central bank. Who'd want the job, you might ask, but evidently she does. And you need someone with sound economic background if she's going to navigate these waters.
Yeah, talking about managing catastrophe, well, one tool they do have perhaps left in the credibility toolbox of the United States is monetary policy. And indeed, if she does get the top job there at the Fed, Janet Yellen would be the first woman to lead the US Federal Reserve. Worldwide, most central bank leaders are actually men, though. Surprise, surprise. In fact, I was doing some of the figures here earlier. Only 12 of the world's 160 central banks actually had a female governor last year. That is equal to somewhere between 6 and 7.5%. And it seems as though, ironically enough, despite all the talk of equality legislation in the West, while women in the world's emerging economies actually stand a better chance of landing the top job there. Just last year, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan and Samoa all appointed women to run their own central banks. Opportunities also appear to be slightly better in the private sector too. Just take a look at London's FTSE 100 companies. Among them, 15% of directorships were held by women last year. So that, again, is around about double what we're seeing in the world of central banking. Pauline?
Yeah, but it still doesn't seem high enough, does it? But from emerging markets to the #1 economy, Janet Yellen certainly setting the path. And hopefully we'll see more women in that role in other central banks. Well, you're watching World Business Today right here on CNN. We're live in Washington as the world's financial leaders gather for the World Bank and IMF meetings. Stay tuned to hear what the head of the World Bank thinks about the U.S. government crisis.
100 years ago,
all the peoples of this land came together to build a bigger and more prosperous nation. Today, our Nigeria is a giant of Africa. We are the 5th biggest oil producer in the world. We have got the biggest population in Africa.
We have everything it takes to become one of the truly great nations on earth.
And now we are attracting more international investment than ever before.
Our strength as a nation is when we all work together as one.
And when we all move together as one.
My mission is to consolidate the unity of our nation.
And so is ours.
Glow proudly announces Nigeria Centenary. One Nigeria, great promise.
The World Bank and IMF are holding their annual meetings in Washington this year. We're there, too, getting reaction from the world's financial leaders to the U.S. government's partial shutdown and looming debt default. Our Richard Quest is speaking to the World Bank President Jim Young Kim right now. Let's listen in.
The World Bank before, Richard? No.
Government shutdown and the debt ceiling. Well, you didn't expect me to ignore that, did you? For goodness sake. Sir, tell me, how worried are you and why?
We're very worried. You know, Richard, we looked back and asked a very simple question. What happened when we had the last near miss in August of 2011? And it turns out that even though it was a near miss and we didn't actually get to default, the effects were really quite substantial. There was about a 75 basis points increase in the bond spreads, and the markets in emerging markets dropped about 15%, and that effect persisted. So we're very concerned because right now there are so many headwinds as it is for emerging markets in the developing world that kind of impact really could be devastating.
When you say that, is this the budget or is it the debt ceiling? Which for you is the more worrying?
It's the debt ceiling. It's the potential for default that really is of greatest concern. You know, the last time it happened was just in August of 2011, and the impacts were severe. I mean, there are many ways that it has the impact, but interest rates go up, right? There is a flight to safety, and then the currencies in developing countries could go down. And, you know, just overall confidence goes down. And right now, many countries need to continue to invest. And if there's a strong confidence effect, we're going to have trouble. And the headwinds that these economies are already facing are just going to get stiffer.
The problem, of course, is we know to some extent that they are playing. I mean, Warren Buffett described it as they're playing with nuclear weapons. But they continue to do so. You're in Washington. It's happening up the road from you.
Right. Well, you know, we're very happy to be a global organization. You know, we have 188 member countries. And, you know, I'm not going to comment on the politics. There's been many people who've commented on the politics. But what I want to say is that for the legislators, I want them to know that the closer they get to default, the bigger the impact it's going to have, not on giant corporations. I mean, that everyone knows that the big companies will all be affected. But it's the rice farmers in Southeast Asia. It's the young men and women in the Middle East who are trying to start businesses. All of those people will be affected and will be affected severely. And those are the people, of course, who we're most concerned about.
That is Richard Quest talking to Jim Young Kim, the World Bank president. They're going to continue their discussion. We'll dip in when we need to. You can catch Richard's full sit-down interview with the World Bank president later on Quest Means Business. Richard is in Washington, where world leaders are gathered for the IMF and World Bank meetings. All issues on the table, including poverty and the impact on the global economy, that shutdown, and the showdown. That's tonight at 9 in London, 10 in Berlin, at midnight in Abu Dhabi, as well as throughout the hours as the week goes on. You're watching World Business Today. Opening bells coming up. We'll bring you all the action.
We went to the beach. He held my hand for the first time.
I forgot my wallet, but my brother sent me money.
I pretended not to notice. He made me dance in front of everybody.
And just when she thought I'd never do it, I did it.
Of course, I said yes. We moved in together to start our new life.
Soon, we had a little one on the way.
And we were the proudest parents.
With the most adorable baby.
Our days were full of dancing.
Even when the airtime demands began.
The children kept discovering the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the land of FC Barcelona, where the weather is beautiful and so is the game. you by Qatar Airways, proud partner of FC Barcelona.
Expedition Sumatra. Philippe Cousteau leads us on an epic trek into a world under threat.
This really is ground zero for the global fight against deforestation.
Join Expedition Sumatra, Saturday only on CNN.
Information is knowledge, information is power, information is security. And I strongly believe our viewers, people all over the world, have real questions of their own. They want to know what's happening in their world, what it means to them, how it'll affect them. And so it's really up to us, once we get elected officials or anybody in public positions in front of us, to keep up the persistence to get out of them really what we're searching for.
Christiane Amanpour, asking questions that help you make sense of the world. Amanpour, tonight on CNN.
I'm Jim Bolden in London. This is CNN.
Welcome back to World Business Today, live from Hong Kong, London, and New York. As you can see, we are open for business in the U.S., and we are seeing very minor gains, mild gains. The market's reacting to the fact it looks like Janet Yellen will be named chairman of the Federal Reserve, a steady hand. That takes away some uncertainty there. But boy, all the uncertainty in Washington surrounding the shutdown and the debt ceiling continues to weigh. We're only up about 0.1%. A lot of investors on the sideline. Pauline?
Maggie, we'll get back to business news in just a minute, but first we want to update you on the top world news stories that we're following. The head of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons says Syrian authorities have been quite cooperative with international inspectors. Speaking just a short time ago, he said progress was already being made to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons stockpiles.
In fact, the first inspection took place on Monday and the previous day, Sunday and Monday, 6th and 7th. And some equipment was already destroyed. And this work continues. Another inspection is being carried out today, and an additional team of 12 experts, in fact, is being deployed to Damascus.
But he also warned that it's a difficult process with significant challenges. A high court in China has agreed to hear an appeal by Bo Xilai. The former high-powered politician was convicted of corruption charges and sentenced last month to life in prison. During his trial, Bo denied the charges and challenged the case against him. He had been the Communist Party boss in the city of Chongqing and also a rising star in the Communist Party. In Bangladesh, at least 7 people have died in a fire that engulfed a clothing factory. Dozens of people were injured. The knitwear factory was on the outskirts of the capital of Dhaka. Officials say the factory was closed when the fire started, but some people were inside working late. Protesters shouted abuse at European Commission President José Manuel Barroso and Italy's President Enrico Letta when they arrived to visit the Italian island of Lampedusa. At least 289 people died last week when a boat carrying migrants from Africa sank close to this island. Demonstrators were protesting about the failure of European politicians to address the suffering of migrants. Dozens of people are still missing after this shipwreck. Nina.
Well, changing course now, U.S. officials, Pauline, tell CNN that some military aid to Egypt will be cut because of recent violence there. The White House is preparing to announce its decision in, quote, the coming days, according to this source. It comes in the wake of the July coup against the Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi and, of course, the turmoil that has followed since as recently as this very week. Egypt's state news agency has been saying that the ousted Egyptian president will stand trial in November now. That would be on charges of committing and inciting violence. Well, Washington gives more than $1 billion in aid to Egypt every single year. Let's get more from our correspondent, Ian Lee, who's at our Cairo bureau this afternoon. The US launched this review back in August, Ian, and things have gotten worse over there in Cairo since, haven't they? What is this going to mean for the Egyptian economy and politically its people?
Well, this aid is really for Egypt.
it is an important, not so much for the economy as well as it's really just the basis of the relationship between the United States and Egypt. This aid is a key point of that, and already relations have been frayed a bit since the ousting of President Morsi, and this will just only add to damaging that sort of relationship. Now, with that aid being cut, the things that are said they won't cut, and that are things that are tied to the Israel-Egypt peace accord, as well as effort or money for counterterrorism. But this definitely will have definitely an effect in the relationship between Washington and Cairo.
Yeah, if you take a look at the sums of money, we're talking about $1.55 billion given by the United States over to Egypt. 1.3 of that spent by Egypt on military hardware that comes from the United States. That is the crux of the relationship here. Why would Egypt be buying defense material at the moment if indeed it can't even get its political system and democracy in order?
I'm having a hard time hearing you, but just kind of go along those lines. The Gulf states have said that if the United States does pull any sort of funding from Egypt, that they will step in and write the checks to fill that sort of gap. They are very adamant about not allowing Egypt to fail. They have a vested interest in keeping this government stable, keeping it on course. They have, the Gulf states really have no love for the Muslim Brotherhood, so they will make sure that Egypt does remain afloat and does remain or keeping it afloat so it doesn't collapse.
All right, Ian Lee there in Cairo. Thanks very much for persevering through the noise of the traffic there. As we were just saying with Ian there, Egypt, a key ally of the United States in this region, Maggie, and the US has got so many domestic issues of its own, taking its eye off the ball in the Middle East, really, according to some of its allies, further into the Middle East just isn't an option. But of course, they've got to look at what's going on in Egypt today and think about whether it's worth giving that money.
That's right. And that's a very important point, Nina. People have been bringing up the sort of political fallout of it. And it's not just domestic. It is questioning whether we're entering an era where we are so preoccupied with what's going on at home that we disengage from the international community, a great concern to many. Let's talk a little bit more about the top story. Just over a week to go until the U.S. debt deadline. One group is using the situation to its advantage. The Taliban released this statement on its official website about the deadlock. In it, it accused U.S. leaders of playing with the destinies of the American people. The statement goes on to say, quote, the American leadership should immediately abandon playing with the oppressed people for the sake of their own personal interests. Well, there's clearly an overriding concern about a U.S. debt default. U.S. investors, as we've been talking about, are getting a little bit of a break today. We did see a little bit of a bounce at the open, although it was pretty tepid, it must be pointed out. And one notable economist talking to CNN over the last 24 hours warns that there's no doubt in her mind that the ripple effects of a debt default will be a negative for the U.S. economy.
The problem is the financial market, although they think the Armageddon scenario where we actually default on our debt and stop government payments is not the most likely outcome. It's possible but not probable. They have to start pricing in the risk. They also have to start dealing with the reality of the actual cost of the economy that compound the longer the government is shut down. Not only are government workers furloughed, there's the spillover effects, cab drivers, retail workers, restaurants outside of, there's a place in Kentucky where they have 3,000 IRS workers that are out of work and no one's going to the restaurants in the area, and they're quite concerned about that. I talked to the president of the Chamber of Commerce there. So there are these spillover effects where you have losses that are real and are going to affect the U.S. economy. It also creates uncertainty about the future, which causes hesitation. We've seen a lot of hesitation already, and hesitation is the last thing you need in an economy that's already been hesitant on growth. And so hesitation in hiring, that's a real issue.
Yeah, a huge issue, especially since we had seen signs of recovery in the U.S. Any sort of a debt default or any sort of lingering on coming to a resolution certainly would have an impact and add to that hesitation. Well, let's return to Wall Street right now to see how stocks are doing now that we're into day 9 of the shutdown. Allison Kozik is live at the New York Stock Exchange with more. And Allison, we saw just some mild gains at the open. How's it looking right now?
Still looking like a pretty flat start this morning. The Dow up, Pauline, about 11 points. You know, going into today, you look at the blue chips, they've lost 350 points since the shutdown started and since all those fears about what's going to happen with the debt ceiling, since those fears began to flare. The focus this morning, though, is primarily on Janet Yellen's nomination. And the thinking is that her possible appointment will keep the easy flow of stimulus money coming, since her views are pretty close to what Ben Bernanke believes. Now, Yellen's confirmation in Washington is going to take months. But at this point, she's got Wall Street's vote, who is very pleased that it's going to be her and not some unknown that's sort of being thrown into the mix. Speaking of the Fed, we do have those minutes from the central bank's latest meeting coming out this afternoon. We'll get some insight into what the Fed was thinking when they surprised Wall Street last month, deciding not to pull back on stimulus, despite the expectation from most that we'd see at least a modest taper. I spoke with one trader about these minutes earlier this morning, and he said these could possibly be the most important minutes that they've gotten all year, because they really want to know, what the Fed was thinking. Now, unlike so many other reports this week, the Fed minutes are not affected by the shutdown, since it doesn't rely on Congress for funding. As for the broader market, you could see the same kind of wavering back and forth today that we've seen much of recently. One trader tells us that investors and businesses are beginning to question what the future would look like if the U.S. would default. And we're going to be listening even more closely to the CEO comments that we get with these earnings reports that come out about what a default would mean for global demand and hiring as well. Pauline?
That would be such an ugly picture. I don't even want to imagine what that would look like. But speaking for the short term, what can we expect from earnings today, Allison?
Earnings are certainly, expectations are lower than what they were even before the third quarter earnings season began. FactSet expects growth for companies to only reach 3%. That's actually chopped in half from its original expectation of 6%. The big fear is that you see what's happening with GDP. GDP, really anemic growth happening in this country. The jobs picture not picking up. You're not seeing, with some of the reports that we've gotten out lately, not seeing real stellar numbers coming out with these reports. So you're seeing that weigh on many companies, especially the expectation is you'll see this weigh on companies in the third quarter, Pauline.
Yeah, and the World Bank had just cut the growth forecast for the U.S. For 2013 as well, just yesterday. Allison, thank you very much. Allison Kozik, they're live from the New York Stock Exchange. Maggie.
Well, here's a story that caught our eye. Starbucks is trying to send a message to the feuding parties on Capitol Hill that getting along with your colleagues can be a win-win proposition. Imagine that. In the U.S., anyone who buys a friend or a coworker their favorite Starbucks drink will get a free coffee for themselves. The offer is good until the end of the week. Starbucks hopes this gesture of goodwill resonates in Washington, and it calls the deal a way for citizens to come together and support one another during these crisis times. You'll remember in a letter released yesterday, Starbucks head Howard Schultz urged fellow CEOs to speak out more about the dangers of the D.C. deadlock. Get out there and get your coffee.
Yeah, I wonder if that applies to Democrats and Republicans, or whether or not they'll just throw hot coffee at each other. Well, coming up next on World Business Today, Walmart goes solo in India. We spoke to the company's Asia CEO on the challenges and the rewards of operating there. We'll be right back.
Sou uma pessoa comum. Eu gosto de apreciar todos os momentos do meu dia. Quanto isso pode me motivar? Como eu posso me manter focada? Tudo ao meu redor, incluindo os momentos do meu dia a dia, é o que eu preciso para me concentrar para a minha luta de 90 minutos. Quero dar esperança às pessoas. A better life, a better world.
Panasonic.
Mainsail, in time with Rolex, supporter of the International Sailing Federation.
Okay, ready for attack? Going over here. Tacking. Come on. Keep going.
The women on SCA are on a charge.
I'm full speed.
Just ahead, Abu Dhabi Ocean Racing appeared to be pushing even harder.
Okay, sign up. Come in for attack, guys. Dagger board down.
There is no margin for error. race yachts with their professional crews pass within touching distance of smaller yachts.
Why this watch? This watch has seen gale force winds, incredible sights, and craft and crew become one. It's marked the most challenging seas, the longest nights, and charted a course for the bravest of brave. It doesn't just tell time, it tells history.
Here's a lovely postcard picture of Hong Kong and Victoria Harbour on this Wednesday evening. We want to stay in the region, but turn our attention to India right now. Walmart stores and Bharti Enterprises are parting company. The world's biggest retailer will buy out its Indian partner's 50% stake in their joint venture. That means Walmart will take full control of its stores in India. There was some fanfare when the two companies teamed up back in 2007, but their relationship soured, mostly over foreign investment rules. Today, Walmart can own a majority stake in its local operations, but it will still have to find a new local partner. Well, Patricia Wu spoke to Scott Price, who's the CEO of Walmart Asia, at this year's APEC conference in Bali. He told her why India is such an important market and why it can be challenging to foreign companies.
I think that certainly if we look at consumer confidence in the three markets that we do business, India, China, and Japan, our customers are worried, and we see that in terms of some of the research that we do, that confidence has come down a little bit. But having said that, it doesn't mean that they're not still interested in investing in the family. So for the products that we sell in our stores across the region, we have not seen a significant impact. What we do see, however, is obviously more movement towards lower price points, where mom comes in and she's a little bit more cautious with her dollar.
The same survey that I just mentioned to you on economic trends, people were most optimistic about the U.S. and Japan. Are you surprised? What do you make of that?
No, I think the U.S. has over hundreds of years always maintained a culture of optimism. So I think, yes, there are some challenges today, a lot of frustration over those challenges, but in general, the U.S. economy always seems to roll with the punches, and I think that that maintains a relative level of optimism. In terms of Japan, we are optimistic about Japan. I'm optimistic about the route that has been laid out, that vision that Prime Minister Abe has talked about. I'd be very, very pleased to see Japan join a TPP agreement, a Trans-Pacific Partner Agreement, without exceptions. At the end of the day, the TPP is a 21st century agreement. It needs to ensure that exceptions are eliminated. If Japan enters the TPP, I think it would continue to drive growth. It would be the end of this deflationary cycle that has existed for years and years. I think the discussions around that has driven optimism among the Japanese average person, and we certainly see it out of our customer base as well.
Protectionism is one issue that has come up with some of the emerging economies here in Asia. Have you seen any issue with that?
You know, I don't see an increase in protectionism. I'm seeing a highlight of protectionism that is getting in the way of growth. So if you were to look at some of the bigger markets, you would see, for example, even though we don't have stores, Myanmar, for example, has come out, is trying to open its market to drive economic growth. In India, for example, even though that's not part of APEC, the government is very keen to restart foreign direct investment. And what they're doing is they're looking at simplifying the environment. I was in a meeting this morning with Commerce Secretary Pritzker and the Finance Minister of Indonesia, and he very clearly said that one of the significant objectives of the Indonesian government is to reduce the amount of regulatory oversight that makes it very, very complicated to invest.
And covering a wide range of topics there. That was Scott Price from Walmart Asia speaking to our Patricia Wu in Bali. Let's get a quick stock check right now and see how Walmart is trading. The share price is trading at $72.64 in New York. It's down about 1/3% at the moment, Maggie.
And speaking of down, so is the Dow, although just fractionally. You're watching World Business Today. After the break, mysterious street artist Banksy takes on the Big Apple, sending New Yorkers on an art hunt.
This is Malawi, the warm heart of Africa. Adventure with your heart and soul in the warm heart of Africa. Destination Malawi.
The Energy Group, one of Africa's most diversified corporations, delivers success to investors and prosperity to growth regions in Africa. With a portfolio in key sectors from media to oil and gas in Nigeria, banking in Ghana, a luxury hotel business in Lagos and Abuja, and a respected global insurance business headquartered in Nigeria, Sao Tome and the UK. The Energy Group, building business in Africa and beyond.
America's Chris DeMarco. Paul Casey lifts the Falcon Trophy. Martin Kamer goes wire to wire. Amazing! Kamer's done it again. Sensational scenes. Kaiser Kamer scores a hat. Bunkers, dancing, aces, and rocks slays the giants. Extraordinary. Stars fall, new stars are born.
You are looking at live pictures of Central Park just outside our studios, and it is another very beautiful fall day. Looks a little cloudy now, but it's very nice out there. UK-based street artist Banksy is sending New Yorkers on a wild art chase. He's been producing at least one work a day, not in a gallery, but on the streets of the Big Apple. He said on his website he was planning a month-long residency in New York. I love that. And this is his 8th and latest piece. It says, it's very small, but it says, I have a theory that you can make any sentence seem profound by writing the name of a dead philosopher at the end of it. And of course, he signed it Plato. Samuel Burke tells us how Banksy has been making his mark here.
Here in New York City, a dog urinating on a fire hydrant isn't usually much of a sighting. But when it's Banksy, it's a work of art.
I feel like it's a really interesting way to get the masses to see your work. As opposed to hanging up in an art gallery where people may not go in. Everyone who lives on this block, I'm sure, walked by it and had thought about it.
From child's play to a wounded heart, New Yorkers are trying to spot it before it disappears. This was one of the first Banksy pieces to pop up in New York City. This is my New York accent graffitied on this garage door here in Chelsea, Manhattan. But like so many things in the Big Apple, if you blink, it's wiped out in a New York minute.
All the Banksy pieces are getting graffitied over, and a group of guys have been going out. I think they're calling themselves the Banksy Restoration Committee, and they're going out and fixing them up.
Right around the corner, art gallery owner Dominic Tagliatella says since Banksy's New York City arrival, interest in his work is spiraling.
And of course, pricing always gets a spike when something of a phenomenon happens. It's a 25 to 35-year-old consumer that's had some relative success financially. And in New York, as you know, there are many of them.
And if you think graffiti art doesn't sell, think again.
In the area of prints, we're selling them between $7,000 to $20,000, and unique works are from $50,000 to $200,000 or $300,000.
But will buying a Banksy piece now be a smart investment in the years to come?
I believe that street art is a risk. I believe that some street artists are modest risk. I think that Banksy is an educated risk.
A risk that will pay off big if Banksy's rise continues, and one day his name appears alongside the likes of Chagall and Picasso. Samuel Burke, CNN, New York.
I have to say, I'm one that's obsessed with this. I love the interactive nature of it. I just want to say quickly, Banksy not commenting on Washington yet, but Wall Street, as you can see, it's down just fractionally once again. Already the early gains have erased. And Nina, this is a fantastic quote that's going around Wall Street. I heard a money manager say yesterday, the circus is closed, but unfortunately the clowns are still working. That pretty much sums up how investors feel about what's happening in Washington right now.
Ouch, that's a painful indictment, isn't it? Well, listen, if Banksy were to try and draw the markets where I am this week, well, he'd have run out of red paint by now, and we haven't quite gotten to the end of the week. We're only in the midpoint. Take a look at these markets here. Even the ones that were on the up just about half an hour ago have now headed south. A lot of concern there as that debt ceiling looms fast. And even the fact that Janet Yellen may well make it to the top job as the Fed and his pro-stimulus hasn't been enough to counter the negative sentiment, Pauline.
Well, Nina, this is how the Asian Pacific stock markets finished. It looked quite different. We ended in positive territory, and the news about Yellen eliminated some of the uncertainty out there. And it was really a relief for emerging markets, which have been hit hard by the prospect of tapering. The Shanghai Composite ended up 0.6%, and this is after the number of Golden Week holiday travelers actually exceeded estimates, up nearly 16% from last year. The Nikkei also up as the yen weakened as the dollar strengthened. Maggie.
Okay, well, let's return to Washington now, where the World Bank and the IMF are holding their annual meetings. Happens every year. We are there, too, as we often are. This time we're getting reaction from the world's financial leaders to the U.S. government's partial shutdown and looming debt default. Our Richard Quest is speaking to World Bank President Jim Young Kim right now. You're looking at live pictures of that discussion going on. You can catch it on the website now. You can catch Richard's full sit-down interview with the World Bank president later on Quest Means Business. Terrific timing. Sometimes these meetings really happen at the right time. Also, of course, you can contact us on Twitter. I don't know if we're going to put up our page, but you know where to find us, at Maggie Lake, at Nina DeSantos, at Pauline CNN, and at WBT. Let us know your thoughts on the government shutdown, on Banksy, if you want, and anything else you'd like to talk to us about. And that is it from Nina, Pauline, and me, and of course the rest of the team at WBT. We will be tracking the events of the World Bank and of course all the market action in Washington throughout the day with you. Please stay with us. We'll see you again next time.
Hyundai believes this is where your inspirations set you free. Hyundai makes every drive brilliant. Live brilliant. Hyundai.
The Energy Group, one of Africa's most diversified corporations, delivers prosperity to growth regions in Africa. With a portfolio incorporating key sectors, which include furniture manufacture, media, insurance in Abuja, Dubai and London, and education in Sao Tome and Principe. The Energy Group, building business in Africa and beyond.
In the business of bringing joy, Kirloskar goes much beyond enriching lives.
CNN News Center, tonight on CNN.
So you're looking New Orleans, you're playing football with your big brother Peyton in the front yard. You look up 20 years later, and you're playing against him in the NFL at the biggest stage of all. What's going to be the most special for you?
This is getting you up close.
Daniel Etu tells us why he's all about trophies, not money.
Why did I come to England? Because I've never won here.
As you and I speak right now, Floyd, what is your place in boxing history?
Hopefully someday I'll go down as the best.
This is CNN.
This month on CNN Business Traveler.
There's a tendency for you to need to slow down.
We're learning how to chill out. Music. With experts in packing.
The tighter I roll them, the less the wrinkles.
Organization.
Everybody feels overwhelmed.
And meditation.
And just let go.
It's the Road Warrior's Guide to the Art of Calm. Good night.
Catch CNN Business Traveller Thursday on CNN in association with Invest Macedonia and Macedonia Tourism.
The Taliban tried to kill her for going to school. They only made her stronger. Her name is Malala, and she talks to CNN's Christiane Amanpour. Her story, her future, her dreams. The bravest girl in the world. Monday on CNN. Tonight on CNN. International.